Welcome to the Impact Multiplier CEO podcast. If you're a chief executive or if you think like one and you want to create exponentially greater impact, then this show is for you. My name is Richard Medcalf, founder of Xquadrant. I coach some of the most successful and impressive CEOs and executive teams on the planet and help them achieve even more extraordinary results. Because no matter how successful you've been in the past, there's always a whole new level of impact available to you. So, if you're ready to play a bigger game than ever before, I invite you to join us and become an Impact Multiplier CEO. Saket Kumar is the Chief Executive of Vitt. Vitt is a business that helps software companies raise immediate and upfront growth capital without debt or dilution. Quite interesting. If you've got a software business, often you're building customer base, but as revenues are coming in monthly, you don't have that much to invest in future growth. And Vitt solves that problem. And it's a really fascinating entrepreneurial story that Saket brings today. He explains what his backstory was and why that drives him to make other startups successful. What's his mission that led him to build this business? And I also asked him, well, what was the one thing you actually focused on? Because there's so much to do when you're building a new business. And he explained the one thing that he really nailed that made growing and scaling so much easier. And we also get into his geeky culture. The fact that he's really expressed who he is in the culture and the team and how that's actually reinforced the cohesion of the business. A real reminder that we don't have to do things a certain way to create an amazing culture. This is a great little episode. Enjoy this with Saket Kumar. Hi, Saket, and welcome to the show.
Hey, Richard. Pleasure to be on.
Hey, it's going to be fun talking today. You're the founder and the chief executive of Vitt, which looks like it's doing really interesting things in the world of startup and software as a service and financing that. So before we dive into the mission that you're on and why is that important to you, tell me a bit about the business. What's Vitt all about?
So Vitt's about offering fast, non-dilutive, founder-friendly cash for growing SaaS businesses, whether startups or scale-ups, essentially giving them the opportunity to access non-dilutive financing at a click of a few buttons. So like the reason we're kind of working on this is I was a VC for a few years and kind of just saw how painful fundraising is, to be perfectly honest, right? It's a multi-week process. There's a lot of ambiguity. It's rather opaque from the perspective of a founder. And we just thought, there must be a faster and cleaner way to do this. And so we set about building Vitt.
Okay, so someone who's building a startup, a software company, they need cash, and rather than going through the VC route or trying to raise financing in different ways, what would they do instead? What do you suggest they do instead?
So they can come to the Vitt website and they can kind of essentially start an application, which is essentially, you connect your kind of bank account information, your accounting information, your subscription management information, you might hold in your Stripe or a Chargebee or something like that. And then our underwriting model kind of turns around and answer within 24 hours. So tomorrow, like we did it today, tomorrow you would know if we can finance you or not, and you'd know how much we could give you, and you'd know what price point.
Great. So yes, this is you're borrowing money, if I understand it right, based on the cash flow in the business you've already got from paying subscribers. Is that kind of the?
Yeah, exactly.
Got it. Great. Well, it sounds a great model. So tell me, let's go back in time. When did you start this business, and what was the catalyst, and why were you in, right? Why did you decide to make this happen?
Cool. So like my co-founder Greg and I kind of started this, I'd say late 2020. And kind of the reason for kind of both of us is that like me as kind of a next kind of VC, it just felt that the way startups were raising capital could definitely be done better. I think venture is a great product. We're venture backed ourselves, right? But it felt like it was increasingly being forced into use cases that weren't necessarily that helpful, right? So if you're pouring money into sales or marketing, does it really make sense that you give up 20-25% of your business or give up a board seat for an activity which essentially you can put an ROI on, right? So I felt kind of financing itself wasn't was like, yeah, venture financing wasn't being used for its kind of appropriate, I guess, use cases, right? Which is like essentially R&D, product market fit finding, et cetera, et cetera. And then also kind of, my co-founder kind of Greg, who had been like a software engineer his whole life, and recently just founded a venture-backed startup, also found, the process to be like unnecessarily human-centric. People like meetings back and forth, take multiple weeks. And like between us, we were kind of just, spitballing ideas and realized, hey, we can actually just essentially, build this on a web app. And so people can kind of, just, you open up their Chrome and then, by the next day, ideally have kind of cash in their bank account.
Yeah, it's great. And so that comes out of your experience as a VC, as well as seeing this opportunity and perhaps seeing things in a new way. Now you've been doing it. It's still obviously a pretty young business in many ways, I guess. You started in 2020, just a couple of years in. What's been the most exciting thing that you've seen in the business?
I think the most exciting thing is like, that first, the first kind of customer we closed was obviously like it was an awesome moment. I remember when the customer closed, like us and the team like went for dinner, and I thought it'd be like exuberant and jubilant, and we all just kind of really like quiet there while this like food was coming through. We just sat around this table at this kind of overpriced food, just kind of like overawed that someone had like trusted us that much. So that is still like the number one moment that always comes to my mind. Yeah. I think the second moment that's a very close second is when our first sets of customers, they essentially decided to work with us again. So they either got their second kind of financing with us or third financing with us, and that just really felt like, okay, we're doing something valuable, right? Because otherwise they would have left, or they would have gone somewhere else, or they, might have decided this type of finance is just not for them, full stop. And instead, we're getting, nearly 40% of our customers to kind of come back and use us again. That was an awesome feeling. But that first one really, I just remember it like, I also remember it like a movie, right? Like that dim yellow light, us sat around this like table and just like all kind of just like, I cannot believe that happened today. Yeah, that was an awesome moment.
Yeah, that's great. So what gets you out of bed, like in the mornings, to build this business? Obviously, that I'm sure you want it to be financially successful. That's always a driver, right? For any entrepreneur, wants a decent payback on their time and effort and everything else. But take the finances out of it for a second. What is it about this business that excites you, or that's meaningful to you?
So I think the kind of, there's two pieces. I'll talk about like our customers and I'll talk about our team, right? So with our customers, everyone is doing incredibly impactful things with their business, right? Whether, we have customers in the reg tech space, the PR space, right? The cybersecurity space, the marketing space, like all up and down, essentially the sectors of the economy, and essentially building products that enable them to do their best work is like really impactful. And kind of, if you draw a through line too with being a VC, that's kind of what you're doing as a VC, right? You're essentially kind of looking for like driven people, right, with an incredible kind of teleology, and you're looking to support them. And we're doing something very similar here. And I think that really like is awesome, right? When you see like, customers, go on to build incredible things. You can see that, they've used the money you've lent them to grow their business 2x or whatever else. That's like remarkably rewarding. And then when you like with respect to the team, it's just a real joy to kind of work with the guys, right? Like everyone is, deeply bought into what we're doing, right? So it will be me being pinged on Slack by colleagues, whether it's like, whether it's someone who's joined as an intern or, or my co-founder, like, where are we with this kind of customer needs this, have we done this A, B, C, or D? And just seeing everyone who like, cares so deeply, it's like, that's always rewarding.
Yeah, you were saying earlier on that, you say you feel you've created quite an interesting team culture. Tell me about that.
I mean, I think we have like just quite a geeky team, to be honest, right? So, like for example, yesterday over lunch, we were just kind of sat around, essentially doing like riddles, right? So there's like this classic one of, you're like there's 100 people in a row that each wearing like a red or blue hat, and you don't know what color your hat is. It's like 100 prisoners essentially, and like what's the maximum number of people who can guess their own hat color, right? And you can see everyone's hat in front of you. And so the answer is that you can save 99 lives plus epsilon But epsilon, like the probability of that person who can't see his own hat. But yeah, just stuff like that. It's just fun. Like it's just like quite a it was like a really bizarre thing because like it's so you can either be red or blue, right? So it's like theoretically you can argue that's 50% chance that you can guess your own hat. So with the strategy, you can say 99 in front of you, and that the person who has their first guess doesn't know. So it's like it's either 99.5 or it's somewhere less than that, somewhere more than that. And then me and my colleague were arguing about whether it's actually 0.5 or not. Right, like it's just like just going off on one, and he's like he's an Oxford physicist, right? And we're just having like heated debate. I'm not mathematical at all, just having a heated debate about like essentially probability. Yeah, it's just like kind of it's kind of absurd, I think, on some degree. It's like but it was really enjoyable.
Well, I know where to send my geeky son now to come and do the internship with you, because he would probably be able to play with that game, as probably could I if I'm being sensible. Yeah, I get you. It's interesting, right? Because every company will reflect the leaders create culture, and so actually it's great to go, this is the culture we want to create, and actually we want to be geeky and thinking about math problems and whatever. It's, why not? Like, it creates a thing. And I think sometimes companies lose some of that particular flavor as they get bigger, but that's not always a good thing. I think it can be great to have that specific idea. One of the previous interviewees on the podcast talked about how when he set up his company, he was very, very intentional about giving all his team, literally even on the first day when there were just three of them in the garage, giving them high fives every time he entered the room, whatever. Every time he saw them for the day, he would give them high fives. And they were like, what's this guy doing? This is like, we haven't done anything yet. And yet that was his way of saying, I want to set this up as a culture of a bit more fun, a bit more high energy, or I want to energize my people. And that's kind of going to be my trademark. And so it's interesting how we create that. How does it work with your co-founder? I mean, you mentioned your co-founder a few times. What binds you together, right? So, in terms of the business. So, is it that you have a shared financial goal that you're trying to achieve together? Is there some kind of outcome you want to get to in terms of what the business looks like, or the customers you want to serve, or, how do you kind of align between the two of you?
So I think there's a few things. I think the kind of big thing that kind of probably drives both of us is that we really want to have like a very lasting impact on startups, right? A lasting positive impact, because like for me, right, like I didn't delve that much into my background kind of before the fact, right? But for me, like before I got into startups, I was kind of aimless, to be honest, right? Had graduated from a fancy university, right, but didn't really know what I was doing. My friends were consultancies or law firms or whatever, and I was kind of like aimless. And then the moment I stepped into my first startup, I was just like, on the second day, I was like, this is it for me, right? Like I really enjoyed this culture. I enjoy what we're doing here. And it's not like that startup was successful, right? We actually didn't find PMF. We didn't really make it. And I still like love that experience and still talk to many of my old colleagues. So the idea of like building a company that is enabling many more people to have that kind of experience, admittedly through capital, right? But still enabling them to go do that is something that's pretty close to my heart. And then for Greg, he's been working for early stage companies since he was like 19, 20, right? So for him it's also very, very kind of similar. So I think that's like a big thing that kind of draws us together. I think another thing that helps is obviously that building a company is stressful, right? There's disagreements, right? There's high impact decisions where you might not be super aligned. I think two things that really help us as well is that we have a lot of respect for each other, coupled with kind of self-awareness. I remember we had this one disagreement. I can't remember what the explicit disagreement was. We had like some disagreement about something strategic, and it wasn't getting anywhere. And it was like late at night, 10, 11 p.m., right? We were just arguing essentially, right? Going around in circles. And I can't remember which one of us said it. And we were just like, this is getting nowhere. Why don't we just sleep on it and just like approach it again with just like a good breakfast and like being a little bit more chipper about it. And like suddenly it was like resolved, So I think that always helps us from like, if we're having disagreements, it's about the facts of the case and not, because we might be tired or stressed out or whatever. Good to like kind of eject out of that and kind of just, finding a way to kind of moving on. And I think the second thing that really helps is that we have a shared sense of humor. So in terms of kind of what binds us together, it's actually what I've found is, and kind of we look for it in hires as well, is like when things are miserable, are you able to have a laugh? Because at the end of the day, like if you're not able to have a laugh, you're just like gonna make it more miserable by being overly stressed out, or the sort of guy or girl who's like, screaming, shouting at the desk is like, not really that helpful for everyone. Yeah, so I think that's also a thing that we always have, that when things are looking really kind of dour, we're able to laugh about it, and simultaneously, right? And when things are going really well, we can also cynically be like, oh, this bubble's about to burst, and like, point out why it might burst and kind of move on. So I think that helps as well.
And what kind of things do drain you? What kind of slows you down in the business?
So I think in general, the kind of big thing that drains me, well, there's two things. I think one is a high level, when I'm, not totally sure that what I'm working on is the most important thing. Because that, that just slows me down. I was like, oh, if this is the most important thing, am I like, should I be even working on this? And that, just really slows me down in kind of the pace of my personal work. And I think the kind of second thing is, given in the space that we work in, right, when we really have to, do something kind of, with respect to kind of regulation, that's just like, we have to go read through this kind of handbook of the FCA. So that for sure is just like, can be a little bit of a drain. Important, but that can definitely be a bit of like, oh, okay, here we go. Let's open up this PDF and put the headphones in. But it's more the first thing that really, that can really slow me down.
It's Richard here with just a quick interlude. If you're serious about multiplying your impact, I have a free resource that you won't want to miss. I've put together a short email course called Exponential Leadership Principles. In it, I set out how you can use the same strategies as some of the world's top leaders to get out of incremental progress and achieve breakthrough results. Be prepared to have your current thinking challenged and to learn some very new ways of leading. If you're interested in following along, simply sign up at xquadrant.com/go/exponential. And now back to the conversation.
Yeah, no, that's well, I see that a lot. We talked about this before, and I've got my new book out, but I guess at least by the time this probably is issued, the book will be out. And it's around that. It's around making time for strategy, because until we can step back and figure out what is the most important thing, we're really not sure whether we're operating at 10% of our capacity or 100%, even if we're working flat out. And yeah, I see it all the time. And I think when you're an entrepreneur, it's even more pronounced, because you have so much flexibility about what you could put your focus and attention on. It's almost like, it's an infinite amount of choice. Yeah, and so I see that. How have you, I know you guys still got a relatively small team, so but I'm curious to know, how do you mobilize people around your vision? You said everybody was super bought in and super engaged. Why is that? Why is it that you feel everybody has really got behind it in such a way?
So, I mean, I think there's like a few pieces. I think one, at the offset, we have a very rigorous interview process. So it's like almost like a self-selection kind of criteria, right? So we hire a lot for, I mean, smart is a big one, right? Kind of, as you can kind of figure out from the earlier the early ways we spend our lunches, but also people who are like really, really relentless. So like everyone in the team had a story of that they were absolutely kind of ferocious in achieving a goal, right? And that's like the one thing that really binds everyone, right? So we have we have an intern on the team, right? He hasn't even finished university. I have another member of my team who spent like 17 years at Goldman. And the one thing I can say about the two of them and everyone else in the team, but I just use them because they're the most disparate examples, that really binds them, is that they're like really relentless and are super clear on the interview. And, we wouldn't have ever given them offers if they didn't have that personality trait. And so those two things kind of, tie into kind of what you about, just being really bought into what we're doing here, is that, people are always hungry to make the customer experience better. Because I think they see a way where, they just have that kind of, to use a cliche, but like the kind of like ownership mentality, right? So whether you're in sales, right, people are aggressive about making sure that turnarounds are faster on emails, that customers are having the best experience, that we're following up diligently, that no customer ever feels that they don't know what's happening. Whether it's like an engineer being like, okay, this part of the integration, takes 15 seconds and it should take 2 seconds, right? Everyone just has that, that mentality around, the different parts of the product. I think that kind of really, really helps in that, because I feel very comfortable in the people that we've hired, because we typically at minimum spend 5 hours with them, if not more. And we diligently ref check everyone, that I feel very comfortable handing things off. And I think that also really helps. I guess to kind of summarize, like, we filter very well the interview process, and that lets kind of me hand things off with, having maybe high level context, but not feeling that I need to micromanage. And then it's easy to be brought into the mission, right? Because it's not some abstract thing that I'm talking about. It's like I might be talking the abstract kind of, high level abstract thoughts, but then members of the team concretely own like very big parts of it. And so then it becomes quite easy, because they're not, they also have their thing that they're driving.
Yeah, I love that. So so it really starts with making sure that you're really thorough about the interview process, which is interesting because not every company does that when they start. Often they're like, we just need to find some people. But it sounds that you've really focused on that. And therefore, it's like the one decision that makes it all easier, right? If you get really good at hiring, all the other stuff downstream becomes a lot easier.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and what I would say to that is, if I look back on like my career, and it's not like a long, illustrious career, right? Hopefully that will change, but it's just, if I look back on my career, like if I look back to the things that I really enjoyed when I did the best work, it was really the people that made the difference. And if you find a segment with product market fit and all that good stuff, right, then the outcomes can be wildly divergent, right? Like, if you're starting a search engine, and you're in the 90s or whatever, right, then it's going to be huge, right? Or potentially could be huge. But the day-to-day, like, do you enjoy your work? Do you feel that you're being productive and getting the most out of your days? For me, that's always been a reflection of, actually, as when I was an employee, not so much how the company was doing, although it's nice to be at a company that's winning versus a company that's losing, but like the people that were around me. And I've been, and I think that was something that I really kind of brought forward. And I would honestly, I would rather do an extra, X amount of hours a week, and kind of, cover the loss of someone not being there, than work with someone who I just don't enjoy working with, because that's miserable. And the thing is, when you're the CEO, you can't blame anyone, right? Because like you didn't have to hire them. So like I kind of took that on hard, and that's why we're very kind of cautious about who we hire.
Nice. So Saket, let's move into a little quick fire question round. It's been an interesting conversation. I'm always curious as to what forms and founds leaders, what's going on inside. So what's the favorite quote that's kind of shaped who you are, or something that you bore your team with by saying on a repetitive basis? Is there some kind of quote that comes to mind?
So a tactical one is, everything is a funnel. On the day-to-day, right? So sales, hiring, vendor management, everything is a funnel. So I think, you can always solve a lot of your kind of operational problems with that. But a more interesting one is this idea, I can't remember it verbatim, but it's this quote by a mathematician who says, optimization is the enemy of evolution. Right. And kind of what he means by that is, if you're always focusing on getting 4 or 5% better, then you're not taking a step back and evolving and maybe becoming, 10,000% better. So I think balancing those two things. So one is, I guess, more a high level strategic kind of perspective, and the other is like a day-to-day, which I find very useful in making sure that operationally things are humming smoothly. Yeah,
nice one. How about a book? Is there a book that's influenced you as a leader? Who you are, how your vision is shaped?
So I mean, I guess there's a few. I think one that sticks top of mind, I think it's a bit of recency bias, because I reread it recently, is a book called How Music Works by David Bryan. I think he was in a band called the Talking Heads, if memory serves. And what I found really interesting there is he talks about the evolution of music in different areas, right? Like, so music is a space where I think many people associate it with genius, right? Like, Mozart is a genius, or the Rolling Stones are geniuses, or the Beatles, or whatever else. And what he says is really interesting because he talks about, the evolution of like African music and contextualize it with like New York punk music and whatever else. He's like, well, the reason, the riffs and the melodies evolved in a certain way in New York and the 50s, 60s, etc., is because of the dingy nature of the rooms, and they would often have fur on the walls, so they absorbed sound in a certain way. So you had to play in a certain way for it to sound good. And then, certain parts of Africa where there's flatlands, that's why you have a great like a drum tradition, because that sort of sound carries very well for like long expanses. And that always like kind of sticks in my mind about like, giving people the context to like thrive and be a genius. And maybe that's a little bit hyperbolic, but the idea of like, context being everything, even if something as like ephemeral as kind of this idea of musical genius, is something that's really stuck with me.
Context is so powerful. Somebody I was speaking to the other day said that strategy is easy, it's the context for strategy that's hard. Which, in other words, what's going on in our own brain, what's going on in how we see the world, that's a context for how we think. It just came to mind, you talked about context in other areas. I think often, defining the context, understanding the context is and creating a context is really powerful. What advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
Take more risks. I think I was I had a relatively good appetite for risk as a young person, at least in the professional context, but just expand that out. Because
why is that important, do you think? How would that have helped you?
I think it would have developed me more as a person. And like what I mean by that is like just doing more things, like things that I may never have been exposed to, I found has like evolved me as a person, right? Like, so I kind of went to Berlin. I lived there 5 years. I'm now back in London, but went there 5 years on a whim. And living in a foreign country, in a country where I didn't speak the language, I had no friends in Berlin when I first moved there. Like really like evolved me as a person. When I go back to university, I produced a student play. I had like zero theatrical experience. I went to like a state school, which I'm not even sure we ever put on a play, right? And so that was something where it's really helped me develop and feel like I've broadened as a person. And I didn't appreciate it at the time, but I could have been doing that like 10x more, right? Whether it's like traveling more, whether it's like diving into activities I'd never done before. So yeah, I think that would be the big one. Yeah,
nice. Saket, many of our best guests on the show come from referrals. So I'm always curious as to who inspires you as a leader. Is there a chief exec or an entrepreneur who's inspired you on your journey? Who'd be a great guest perhaps for one of these shows? Who comes to mind?
So I worked with this guy called Dan Kashab, who's the founder of a company called Choco, which is a unicorn based out in Berlin. I worked with him at his prior startup called Validay, where he was one of the co-founders, and Validay wasn't as successful, right? And I worked with him, and it was one of the best, at the time I didn't appreciate it, but one of the luckiest things I've ever like professionally could have happened to me. That I just got to work with this guy day in, day out and see how he operated. And to your kind of second question about like what I admire about him is that he really makes time for you as a person, right? Like he did that when I worked with him, but more importantly, right, when, I hadn't worked with him for a few years, his company was like skyrocketing, right? All the fancy funds were investing, the valuation was going bananas. And when I said I wanted to build something, within 2 days, right, like I think we had coffee and he would chat me through it. When I said we were going to go hire people for the first time and I'd never hired people before, right, he calls me Saturday morning. I hear frying in the background. I'm like, what's up? He's like, oh, I'm cooking brunch for my girlfriend, but okay, this is how we should do it. And then just ran me through his matrix, how he thinks about hiring, which also influenced why we're so particular about hiring, because it was one of his kind of learnings. And it's just like, always makes me feel that like I'm the most important person that he's talking to. And I just know that's not true, right? Like I know he's got like he has his own employees now, his own direct reports, right? He has his board members and investors and like a million other people, and probably everyone's knocking on his door for his time. And back in Validay, or whether now he's like a successful kind of unicorn founder, he's always made me feel that like he has time for me and he will always have time for me. And I really hope that in 10, 15 years, when there's like a Vitt alumni network, that all the people feel even 50% as good as I feel when I chat to them.
Yeah, that's a beautiful example. It's so clear and why how it makes you feel, right? It's really important. Saket, no matter how much we've achieved, there's always the next level to get to. So where does Vitt go from here as a business? What's next for you guys?
I mean, our kind of obsession is always kind of, giving the best kind of products to kind of startups and scale ups. And one thing we've seen over the past few months with macro uncertainty, interest rates rising, is that there's a lot of startups who have cash in their current account and they don't know what to do with it, right? They don't know how to optimize it. Rates essentially were at zero between like 2009 and 2022. So no one's really even got a strategy. And so we're building a product, that will enable startups to have access to, great yields that are secure. So, their cash isn't, losing 10% on inflation, essentially.
Right.
So that's the next problem we want to go solve alongside our core kind of, financing product.
Yeah, nice. Thanks for sharing that. And what about you personally? This is the Impact Multiplier podcast. I'm always thinking, what's going to create a breakthrough in your own leadership? What might you need to do differently if you want to multiply your own impact?
I think it's like, the first thing is kind of what I said earlier about, making, decisions faster and faster and faster. But obviously at a certain point you asymptote there. So making decisions faster and faster and faster. And secondly, getting a better perspective on like where I actually need to be making decisions. I think I'm still like, almost like a stereotypical founder in that regard, where there's definitely stuff where I check it or I want to take a look where maybe I can just be a bit more hands-off. So I think those two things in parallel, right? So making more decisions, but also understanding of those more decisions, which are the decisions I should actually be focusing on.
Yeah, it's like sometimes it's like asking better questions, right? It's like finding new questions to answer instead of the ones that are mutually in front of you sometimes. But thank you, that's really honest. Yeah, and I think it's the journey of anyone in a growing company is how do I keep letting go of what I have been doing, which I feel comfortable with, to find these other areas which I'm not yet attending to, which is a challenge for us all. Well, hey, this has been a great conversation. I've enjoyed this, Saket. If people want to find out more about you or about Vitt, how do they do that?
So they can come to the website, vitt.sh, so vitt.sh. If you're wondering why .sh, it's a joke about shell script. It's very geeky, which kind of sums up the team. So yeah, vitt.sh. And or you can email me, saket@vitt.sh. I'm always very available.
Perfect. Well, I'll put those in the show notes. And hey, it's been a fun conversation. Thanks again for taking the time. And I look forward to seeing how Vitt continues as you continue to add on more and more high growth software companies who want quick access to financing. So looking forward to watching the journey.
Awesome. Thank you for the time, Richard. Have a lovely afternoon.
Take care.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Now let's talk about you. When you're in top leadership, when you're in the biggest role of your career, who supports you at a deep level as you lead others? Who helps you multiply your impact and get to the next level? If you're ready to learn more about our content, our coaching, and our community, then visit us at xquadrant.com.